And it is a matter of fact, not guessing, not conspiracy theory. It is fact on the record that every Monday morning when George Bush was available, that he would hold a conference telephone call with George Bush and his cabinet, and Haggard would advise them on global policy, on what to do to make the world a better place. Which is slightly worrying, because Pastor Haggard is what they call an end-timer. He believes that the day of judgment is due any day now. And he's one of several leading evangelicals in America who believe that not only will the final battle of Armageddon, good against evil as predicted in the Bible, not only will it happen, but that it should happen, and that it is America's duty to make it happen. Don't believe me? Read some of the books you can buy in America on this. It's really quite scary. Because you see, the end timers are waiting for the rapture. That moment where just before the day of judgment, the devout, those who've lived good, sinless lives, will be bodily lifted up into heaven. Well, this is a fairly modern belief, in fact. It really only came to be this vision as we know it now, really from the 1800s onwards. But the problem is, you see, that can't happen until the Battle of Armageddon's been fought. And this worries some people because they believe there is a secret agenda beneath all these evangelicals in power in America trying to make this happen. Does that explain why world peace never really seems to arrive? Does that explain why the Middle East problem is never really sorted? Because somebody doesn't actually want it to be sorted. Now, it doesn't really matter whether or not there's any truth to what they believe. What is important here is the fact that these people believe it. And if they believe it, they are going to try to influence world political events to make this come true. And I think we need to be very wary of this. And even though George W. Bush is gone, don't forget that President Obama has strong, charismatic, evangelical links. Hillary Clinton is a member of the family, a very fundamentalist Christian evangelical movement in America. So nothing's changed just because we have a new government on this score. And this is where conspiracy theorists say, well, hang on, it's very obvious we are not being told the truth about what these people believe. Now, don't misunderstand me. There's nothing wrong with a religious belief. People must be free to believe what they want to believe. But it's when it's fundamentalist and it influences all of our lives without us being told, that's when it becomes a problem. By the way, if it makes you feel slightly better, it may interest you to know that Pastor Haggard was in fact disgraced in the sex and drugs scandal a few years back now. So that might tell you something about the nature of what's going on here. But nonetheless, there is clearly more influencing the political machinations of the world than we are being told. And this is, of course, where conspiracy theory begins to come into its own. There are some people that believe every single event in the world is coordinated, engineered, manipulated to bring about a world that suits the needs of a few people, a ruling elite, somewhere at the top, which some people call the Illuminati. There are various names you can give to it. And the belief of the conspiracy theorists is that every war, every major terrorist atrocity, every recession, every economic crash, all of it is in some way manipulated, or at least used to create a mandate of control, to suit the needs of people who are running the worlds for their own ends. Now, what's the evidence for this? And why would anybody want this kind of world to be created? Well, it is the belief of many that what is trying to be made here is a one-world government, which is maybe better known to us under the term the New World Order, which is now a phrase that's openly used by people like President Obama, Gordon Brown, openly say we are creating a new world order. But only 10 years ago, less, if you'd have said the phrase New World Order to a conspiracy theorist, they would have frowned at you. Because that's seen as the front for centralized government, Lots of power being put into very few hands, and into the hands of people that haven't so far proved to be very friendly or trustworthy, and who seem to want power above all else, and certainly don't seem to care very much about us. What's the evidence? Well, one of the key things that the conspiracy world believes is that they are creating a system of surveillance and control. And when you look around you, certainly in Britain, and I can't speak for here, but certainly in Britain, it's getting very heavy. The control is out of control. The surveillance is now so much so, we have more cameras in England per person than any other country in the world. They say that you are on film an average of 300 times a day if you go outside of your house. Why? Why is everybody being treated like a criminal? Why are we now having this new ID scheme placed upon us? Here is George Orwell on an ID card, by the way, just to make the point, ironically. Now, the idea of an ID scheme maybe doesn't seem too strange. We have passports, we have driving licenses. What's the problem? Well, the problem is that the ID scheme that's being proposed for Britain, well, not even proposed, it is happening already. It's biometric for a start, which means that all your genetic history, every detail about you, about your physical makeup, your family history, everything will be recorded on a centralised database, which will be linked in with, at first, cards. And that means that within 10 years, if you look at the way things are going, everywhere you go, everything you do, everything you buy, to use public transport, to enter public places, anything will require a swipe of your ID, all being fed into a centralised database. And centralised databases have not proved themselves to be very safe. Not in Britain, where there seem to be information leaks every other week. And that means that gives a lot of power over us to any authority that wanted to misuse this information. You see, if we lived in a society of angels, where we could love and trust these wise people working above us, it would be all right. But it's not like that. Because the people implementing the scheme have proved themselves to be extremely dark and rather unpleasant, and certainly not trustworthy. And of course, the next stage of all of this is the microchip. A microchipping of the population has already begun. It is not science fiction. We've been microchipping our pets. And now it is people. And now there is a program of everybody having their ID, not on a card, but on a chip, which will be recording everything you do and everywhere you go. And that information will be available to anybody up there, the powers that be, that want it. And it makes you feel like you're being treated like a criminal from the start. Now, there are people who think this is a good thing, but certainly in Britain, it does not sit well with a lot of people. They do not like it, and it feels like too much control, too much surveillance. And the problem is this, that if a government were to come into power that were to be more fascist, shall we say, they could very easily neutralise or get rid of anybody whose political views they didn't want, not by killing them, but by deleting them off the database. And then one day you find your chip or your card doesn't work. You can't go anywhere. You can't buy any food. You can't function in society. You've been neutralised to the point where you are not even a part of the human race. And this would be a very clever way of controlling people. So this is the kind of world we're moving into. Now, exactly why we'll come to. But some people say at this point, well, this can't be true. This cannot be a bad thing, because if it was, people would have tried to warn us about it. Well, actually, quite a lot of people have been trying to warn us about it, but some of them, you see, when they try to, everybody laughs. I wonder how many here will recognise this gentleman. If I show this in England, a few, if you show this in England, everyone goes, oh! This is David Icke. And you see, in Britain, David Icke was a well-known TV presenter, very well known. And then in about 1990, he, in the eyes of the public, went mad. got spiritual, got into New Age religion, started to talk about conspiracy theory, and basically made a fool of himself and then vanished. Well, none of that in fact is true, but that's the public view of David Icke, and everybody laughs at David Icke until they start to look at some of what David Icke actually was saying 20 years ago. And people like Icke have been warning us about microchipping, ID schemes, New World Order, One World governments. He even said it was very likely there would be a huge war on terror begun by a huge terrorist atrocity in America. It's actually quite scary how much Icke seemed to know. I don't think it was psychic. He just was looking at the way things were going and working out what was likely to happen. But of course, everybody laughed back then, but now they can see this world coming true before our eyes. Maybe this needs some re-evaluation. But the problem some people have with David Icke, and for some it is a big problem, is that he has one belief that is seen by many as being one step too far. And that is, as some of you will already know, his belief that the British royal family are in fact extraterrestrial lizards. And that the presidents of the United States will carry an extraterrestrial gene. Well, for some people this is too much. This is, for them, all the evidence they need, that Icke is mad. And yeah, it's a bit extreme. But when you look at it more closely, there are some interesting aspects to this theory, one of which is this. If you take the idea of the extraterrestrial gene out of the picture, it still sort of makes some sense. So, the general belief is that millions of years ago, maybe thousands of years ago perhaps, extraterrestrial beings came to Earth and interbred with mankind. And they seeded a gene that's been carried on through the generations, maintaining a ruling elite, which has carried on down to us still today. And that elite maintained its bloodlines, made sure that nothing ever interferes with it, and though it goes quiet in some generations, it always resurfaces on top. That's the idea. But if you take even the idea of an extraterrestrial gene out of the picture, the fact is, there is clear evidence. Monarchies, rich dynasties, influential families, they maintain their bloodlines very carefully. They do. So, just as a metaphor, if you like, an analogy, there is still an element of truth to this. And it is also a fact that all presidents of the United States are generally quite close blood relatives to the British royal family. The British royal family seem to play more of a part in this ruling elite than it may at first appear. Did you also know that, for instance, President Obama is eighth cousin to Dick Cheney, George W. Bush's second in command? Everybody's in the club, they're all linked. You don't get to be in a position of power unless you are the right people, belonging to the right secret society. Whether it be Skull and Bones, the Shriners, Phi Kappa, Beta, the Bohemian Club, Freemasonry at the top degrees, whatever it may be, there are links between, clearly, organisations that do not let anybody in who is an outsider. Now the thing about this is, it's very easy to laugh at the idea of the extraterrestrial gene, but there are myths and legends around the world that speak this story again and again, whether it be Sumerian, Egyptian, or indeed, even if you read the Bible. And if you go to chapter 6 of the book of Genesis, it very clearly states that a race of beings, traditionally shown as a race of giants, from the stars, calling themselves the sons of God, came down, looked at the daughters of men, saw they were pleasing, and basically interbred with them and gave birth to a hybrid race known as the Nephilim. And it clearly states that the Nephilim carried on very powerful even afterwards, and that they maintained their power as the generations have gone on since. This is the Bible. So this same story resurfaces in every single myth and legend. And it makes you wonder, maybe there could be a grain of truth to it somewhere down the line.